Ver. Deixa eu ver se aparece. Está aparecendo lá. Ok. We are in live. Steven? Alguém pode verificar se está rolando lá? Deixa eu ver.
Consegue ver aí, Fabiano? Tô sem meu computador aqui.
Está rolando, sim. Então,
Tá.
pessoal, sejam bem-vindos para a nossa primeira live do curso de extensão de aprendizagem ativa com o ANKI. Esse curso é planejado, né, para as pessoas que têm interesse em aprender um pouco mais sobre repetição espaçada, recordação ativa e metodologias ativas de aprendizado. E meu nome é Luiz, para quem não me conhece. Aqui eu estou com a Isabelle, com o Vinícius e com o Fabiano Dias, e também com o Steven, que é o nosso apresentador hoje. Antes de apresentar o Steven, gostaria de falar um pouco para vocês sobre o projeto de extensão. Nosso projeto de extensão, além das pessoas que estão aqui, é composto também pela professora Maria Cristina Santos, que é a coordenadora, e pela professora Cláudia Maria Feijó, que as duas não puderam estar aqui hoje, né? Mas elas estão coordenando por baixo dos panos as coisas, tá certo? E, enfim, o nosso projeto o nosso projeto, eu vou estar acompanhando vocês junto com o pessoal aqui, e o nosso projeto, ele almeja trazer para a comunidade acadêmica evidências a respeito de aprendizado dentro dos cursos da área da saúde, ok? E é por isso que a gente investe tanto em ANKI, em debater com vocês também sobre ansiedade, sobre depressão, porque tudo isso envolve o aprendizado, né? Então, vamos começar a live de hoje. Ao final da live, vocês vão encontrar na descrição um link de acesso em que vocês vão poder colocar seus dados para preencher um certificado, e esse certificado vai contabilizar como algumas horas de formação para vocês, ok? Então, fiquem atentos ao final da live, ao final da apresentação do Steven, vocês vão encontrar ali na descrição. Basta preencher e pronto, vocês vão receber no e-mail depois de um tempinho. Beleza. Quem é Steven? E o que é Migako? Eu vou dar uma explicaçãozinha rápida, porque depois o Steven vai abordar isso com vocês melhor. Então, o Steven, ele é um integrante da equipe Migako, que é uma equipe de programadores e de pessoas interessadas no aprendizado de línguas por imersão. A equipe Migako faz diversos plugins para o programa ANKI, que a gente está ensinando a mexer no curso de extensão. E você pode encontrar instruções fáceis aí pela internet sobre usar esse programa. E, além disso, eles produzem outros materiais relacionados ao aprendizado de línguas através do sistema de imersão, beleza? Isso tudo a gente vai conhecer melhor durante a live, mas só quero dar uma introdução. Além disso, o Steven, ele é nativo da Alemanha, ele fala alemão, japonês e inglês. Ele é formado em ciências da nutrição e também em administração de saúde, ok? Ele vai abordar o currículo dele melhor para vocês ali, mas para vocês terem uma ideia antes de começar. E eu acho que é isso que eu teria para falar do Steven e do Migako. Vocês vão conhecer melhor tudo isso no decorrer da apresentação. Muito obrigado, pessoal. Steven, now it's up to you. You can share your screen.
Okay, let's hope this works. And I'm going to, let's see for a second. Okay.
All right.
Okay. So I'm going to start, and first, before I get into what I'm going to talk about today, just a few words. I think you heard a little bit about me just now. As you probably also heard, I don't speak Spanish, so I didn't understand all of it, but some words here and there. So I think there were some words about me. And I will still start with a few words and how I got into language learning before I go into the main topic. So my name is Steven. I'm 29 years old and I'm from Germany. Originally, I studied health management and nutrition sciences, so this whole topic is probably extremely disconnected from what I originally studied. I still work in this field currently, but yeah, I have a lot of interest in languages, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a background of why I got into this all and why I'm working with Migaku before I go into the main topic. I learned English through immersion. Now, this isn't the whole truth, as pretty much everybody in Germany that goes to school in Germany has to take English class in some form. But by the time I got out of school, my English was still really bad. I couldn't even read basic books. But afterwards, I got interested in nutrition, I got interested in sport, and I wanted to read about the topics. And I soon realized, hey, most good books are written in English, even though there are some translations available in German, but not for all of them. And I want to read in English, and good websites, they're almost always in English. So I started reading, I took a dictionary, and even though I had a lot of problems in the beginning, and because, like I said, my English was still pretty bad, I just went through it, and slowly it got better and better. I understood more. I could from articles, I switched to books. I started reading basic books, and soon I was able to read even scientific books. Well, soon, it took a few years. So basically, I made this slow progression from easier material to harder material while always looking up the words. And I never really cared about whether I understood everything in a given sentence. All that was important for me was understanding the message, understanding the content I was interested in. And the first time I realized, hey, I got really good in English was when I wrote my thesis for my first degree, and I had to read studies in English. And while I was reading those studies, I realized, oh my God, I can understand them. I have no problem following what happened. I was so bad at English before. And then when it hit me, yeah, it was interacting with content that interests me, interacting with the English language, be it in spoken or in written form. And I did this for a few years before in 2018, I decided I want to learn a new language, mainly because up until that point, a lot of my free time was spent with playing computer games and stuff like that, and I wanted to do something productive. So I decided, hey, I'm going to learn a new language, and it ended up with Japanese. And even before I started, I knew, hey, I want to do the immersion route, because if there's one thing I hate and I learned from school, it's textbooks and classes. I can't stand it. That was my knowledge at that time. I only knew I want to go about this by going quickly over basic grammar and some basic vocabulary, and then get into reading in the language and listening in the language, because that is what interests me, and that is what will keep me going. Because if I have to do it only by classes and textbooks, I will probably quit in about a week. But I found a few YouTubers and other people that are still pretty big in the immersion learning community that gave advice on how to follow through with this, specifically for Japanese. And they gave me a real plan I can follow to get to my immersion content as fast as possible. And that's what I did. I did this for, now I'm in my third 3.5 years, a little bit over 3.5 years. And so it's as much fun as it was in the beginning. Then how do I got to Migaku? I started making YouTube videos also in 2018, just to document my journey a little bit, what I was doing, how it was going. I was still having fun, and document it all with how much time I was spending for reading, listening, and whatever I was doing. And that's where Lucas, the founder of Migaku, found me. And I started working for them, he asked me, hey, do you want to support us? And I said, yes, I want to. I like what you guys are doing, so I want to help you out. And about 8 months ago, I started working with Migaku, and I still am, and I'm really happy where I am. I will talk a little bit more about Migaku later on, but this just for now. And my roles in the team, it's pretty complicated because all the other guys are programmers and I'm not. So I try to take on all the other stuff that has nothing to do with programming. So be it, my main thing is making YouTube videos, but also writing articles, some graphic stuff here and there. So as long as it has nothing to do with programming, I will try to do it and help out. Okay, but with that, I guess that's enough about me, and we can start with a small overview and what we're going to talk about today. The first thing, I will go a little bit more into what is immersion, what kind of thing you have to have in your mind when you think about immersion, because this changed a little bit, or it didn't change for most people, the understanding of what immersion is, but in the immersion community, it has a little bit of a different meaning. So we'll explain this a little bit. Then what role does the SRS play in all of this? Why do we use an SRS to support our immersion learning? Who are we? So who is Migaku? I will show you a few pictures of the guys. Then what exactly do we do? So what is our plan? How do we try to support people who try to learn through using an SRS and immersion? And then last but not least, what are our future goals with this whole project, what we are doing? And we'll start with what is immersion. The classical meaning, or at least if you ask somebody on the street who is familiar with the term immersion, what immersion is, it's moving to the country where the language you're trying to learn is spoken. So if you're trying to learn Japanese, you would move to Japan. If you're trying to learn Chinese, to China, German to Germany, French, France, or any other country where the language is spoken. Basically, the idea is to get in a kind of sink or swim situation, meaning you are surrounded by the language, you are living there, you have to interact with people that only speak this language, so you have to learn it. If you want to rent a car, you have to be able to speak the language. You want to order food, you have to be able to speak the language. So that's the basic understanding of immersion as most people see it. Being immersed, as the picture shows, and the language is all around you. Now, this does work, but it has some downsides, and for a lot of people, it doesn't work. Reason being that depending, especially for English speakers, and that's probably the easiest example I can give, because English is used all over the world, and depending on where you're going, if you work in another country, and most big firms where you will end up working use English even in their workplace. So you have English at work, and when you get home from work, you're really tired. And even though you should be interacting with the language if you want to get better at it, you're just too tired, so you rather watch something in English. You get your entertainment in English. You read your books or watch your shows in English. And if you can't speak the language already to a certain degree, it would also be really, really hard to communicate with people, to find friends you can talk to in the new language you're trying to learn. And that happens for a lot of people, that they end up after years and years of living in the country, they still can't speak the language because they created their own little bubble where they speak in their mother tongue and can't really use the other language. So in theory, this seems great, but in practice, there are a lot of problems. Plus, the obvious problem for a lot of people, it's not feasible to move to the country the target language is spoken in. Especially if you have interest in multiple languages, it's just not feasible to travel around the world and try to live everywhere. So in the immersion community, there is a different meaning, or in brackets, a new meaning, but it's only in our community, so I have to explain it a little bit. And the new meaning is basically just time spent interacting with the language. So whether you are reading books, you are listening to a podcast, you're watching shows, you're reading comics, you're playing games, all of that counts as immersion. In that moment, you have the language around you, you hear the language, maybe if it's an audio-visual content, maybe you have text on screen as well, so you have both. You're surrounded by the language for that moment. And all that counts is the time spent in this case. So that is the new meaning of immersion in the immersion learning community. So when somebody talks about, I did immersion, as a lot of people say, I did immersion today for 5 hours, that means this person read or watched a show or in whatever way interacted with the language for 5 hours. And what is the goal of all of this? The goal of immersion is to get a feeling for the language. I'll go a little bit into more detail to explain what this feeling means, what I'm trying to say with this in a second. But that is the overarching goal of immersion, is to get a feeling for the language you are trying to learn. The origin of immersion learning is kind of in the input hypothesis. At least it's influenced a lot by the input hypothesis by Stephen Krashen. And obviously, because it's a hypothesis, it's a little bit longer, there's a little bit more detail. But today I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, because the most important point, or what has the most influence on the immersion learning community, is the so-called comprehensible input. And there's a really famous talk of Krashen on YouTube where he explains this idea to an English-speaking audience, and he speaks in German while drawing a picture and explaining the parts, speaking in full-blown German in a way they can understand. And he tries to make it comprehensible for the audience. And the idea is basically, to get good in a language, you have to get messages you understand in that languages, and a lot of them. So that's basically a lot of influence in the immersion learning space came from this. Obviously, not all of this, and a little bit changed depending also on the language you are learning. So the specifics are obviously not influenced by this, have been worked out by people in the community over the years. And yeah. Okay, so let me give you an example for this feeling. Now that you know basically what immersion is, what we understand with immersion, what do I mean with the goal is to get a feeling? I can give you an example in English. If you have the two sentences, the big red dog and the red big dog, for a native speaker or an advanced speaker of the language in general, it is pretty easy to tell what the difference is or what is the right sentence. And in this case, it's the left one. But why is that? Obviously, there is a rule, but most native speakers don't know this rule. I also had to look it up because, like I said in the beginning, I really don't like grammar study. So I have no idea about English grammar, and if somebody asked me, I couldn't explain it. So I had to look it up. The rule is called the Royal Order of Adjectives. And this rule basically tells you in what order the adjectives have to be for it to be correct. And the order is determiner, quantity, opinion, size, age, shape, color, origin or material, and last qualifier. So in this case, we have big, which is size, and you have red, which is a color. So the left one is correct in this case. And this is what we basically mean. You will build a feeling for what is right or wrong without knowing why. And this is what I said. I know that the big red dog is correct, and native speakers also know the big red dog is correct. But why is that the case? Why? What is the rule behind that? They can't explain, and they have to look it up if they want to explain it. But why is that? If you see something often enough, your brain, even though it seems almost impossible, your brain notices the patterns behind all those things. Even if I haven't seen exactly the big red dog 1,000 times while reading or listening or whatever I was doing in the language, I saw a similar construct. It could be the small white pencil, the big blue ball, whatever. Even though they don't seem that connected, your brain notices those patterns and you pick up on them. And there's also an interesting way for you to feel this on your own body. It's not perfect, obviously, because it has nothing to do with language learning. But if you sit here and you try to cross your arms like this, and now you try to turn this around, and I think it's right like this. I even have to think about it because I'm not used to this. And suddenly, if I'm in this position, it feels kind of strange. Something is off. The other way around, this feels correct. This should be my default position. Because I have done this one move so many times that I exactly know what it should feel like. And there's another one. If you put your hands together like this, here you can see it, and then I just move it over one, it's not as much difference. There's not that much difference, but it feels wrong to me because I've done this motion so many times that the other one seems off to me. And this is, you can use this as a kind of image of what a goal of immersion is. You see a certain type of structure 1,000 times, and then one time you hear or see it in another structure, in another form. In this case, the red big dog, and you think, even though if you don't know why, you still feel like something is off. It should be the other way around. And that is basically the goal, to give your brain, through a lot of input in the language, through interacting it, you get this kind of pattern where your brain figures out how the language has to be structured. What words come after each other? What words are used together? How are sentences structured? You will pick up on a lot of those nuances. And that is basically the goal. Get a lot of input so your brain can figure out the structures in which the language uses. Okay, so now that we have the basic why we're doing immersion, basically to get a feeling in the language and to get this pattern, because you can use it later on when you're interacting with the language to understand it, but also when you're using it yourself, because if you start outputting, for example, and you notice you say something wrong, you will notice it yourself because you have this pattern in your mind. But what role does the SRS play in all of this? Why are we using it? The basic idea, or if you sum it up in one sentence, would be to prime your brain to pick up new words or grammar structures. I just said words in this case, but grammar structures as well. And there are a lot of people who use an SRS together with immersion learning will have this experience over and over again. You learn something in your SRS, in your spaced repetition system, and a few days later you are watching a show and suddenly, that's that word. I learned it just a few days. There it is. And then you have this aha moment because you just learned it and now you've seen it in context and have a little bit of a stronger connection with this word instead of just having some random information you learned in a system that has nothing to do or is not directly connected to the language itself. So this helps a ton. You could also basically describe it like the effect when you decide you want to buy a car, you want to buy a red car, and suddenly you start seeing red cars everywhere. It's a similar idea. So through learning it in the SRS, you suddenly start hearing those words, you pick them up here and there. But that's not the only goal of the SRS, not only to prime your brain so you can pick them out while you are listening or while you are reading. There's a little bit more. We also have make content more comprehensible, because if you're a beginner, content you're going to engage with, whether it be books or listening material, will probably have a lot of unknown words for you or unknown grammar structures. And through putting them into your SRS, you will have an easier time later on when you interact with similar content again. Then also make remembering grammar and vocabulary more efficient. And I'm going to talk about this point a little bit more in a second, because this one is important and a little bit more difficult to understand what I mean with making it more efficient. And the last one, give you a basic meaning, and in brackets more, because it depends on the language what you're learning. If you're coming from a background where you're already used to reading the Latin script, learning another language where you have to read the Latin that uses the Latin script, you basically only have to memorize or have to remember the meaning in the SRS. But if you're learning, for example, Japanese, you will also have to memorize the reading. But on a basic level, just the meaning, give you a rough idea what the word is and hear it a few times so you can pick it out while you're interacting with the language. So what do I mean with efficient? The base idea behind all of this is when we have information, we are trying to learn something, we pick out an information up, it has a kind of, it has a time limit in our head until we are about to forget this certain information, whatever it may be. And as this graph already shows, if you're learning an information on day 0, so it's the first day you learn this piece of information, on the second day, or on the day after, you will already have forgotten about 80% of the information you learned. And after a week, probability is pretty high that you have forgotten anything. But if you review it on the next day, it's once again fresh in your mind, but it's not only fresh, it gets stronger. Similar idea to how in training, the more you train, the stronger your body gets. Similar it is with a memory in your head. If you repeat it often enough, the time interval until you're about to forget it will get longer and longer. In this example here, as you can see from the forgetting curve, if you review it on the next day, and then you can review it 2 days later, and then you can review it 3 days later. So the interval, and as you also can see from how the lines are drawn here, the time it takes for you to forget the information gets longer and longer. That's the basic idea behind all of this. You review information shortly before you are about to forget it, so the memory gets stronger, and it takes longer for you to forget the information again. And why is this so efficient if you use an SRS? Because the SRS calculates this for you. So every piece of information you put into the system gets calculated on its individual basis, and the system tells you, hey, you will be forgetting this thing soon, so I'll show it again to you, so you can refresh that memory and make it stronger, so it takes longer before you're about to forget it again. Obviously, it's only a calculation, so it's not perfect. You can't have a retention rate of 100% with a system like this, because there are a lot of factors that go into how long you will retain a certain information. For example, if it has a lot of connections to other information you already have, then it's going to take longer for you to forget it. Or if it's for whatever reason had a really big impact on you, you'll probably also remember it a little bit longer. But on average and in general, those calculations are pretty accurate to help you to gauge when you're about to forget a certain information. And that is what all those SRS systems are built on. SRS, spaced repetition systems. That the interval of the information you're trying to learn gets longer and longer. And why is that important? Another thing that plays into this, why this is important, is that every word in our life has a frequency. What is it? What do I mean with the frequency? If you take a book, let's say, for example, we take Lord of the Rings, and we could take the word orc, and we can look through all the pages and count how many times do we see the word orc. And we can do this for all words in the book or in one of the books. And then we can sum them up and put them all in order. In how frequent those words appear in the book. This is the frequency. What you get out of this is the frequency of the words in this book. And probably orc would be behind a word like you, because you is probably used a lot more often than a word like that. And you could do this not only for a book. In theory, you could do this for your whole day. So you could, when you're speaking with your family, when you're watching a show, you could take all those words and create a list out of them and see how frequent you encounter each word. Obviously, this is really difficult. For second language learners, so if you're learning another language, it's also, at least at the current moment, it's also not that easy to do that, but we are working on something that can make this a little bit easier. But why is that important? Why is it important to know that every word has a frequency? I can give you an example. Let's take a word X with a frequency of Y. And to make it a little bit more concrete, take the word house and say, in the content you are consuming, if you are learning English in this example, in the content you are consuming, this word appears for you every 10 days. Meaning, today you read an article and the word house appears. You haven't seen the word yet, you learn the word, you look it up. But depending on what you consume, you see words more often or not as often. And in your content, it takes 10 days. So if I see the word today, I will see it again in about 10 days. But as if you remember what I showed you before with the forgetting curve, in the beginning, if information is fresh for you, almost a day later, you will have forgotten 80%. And a week later, you will have forgotten pretty much everything of it, all of it. That means with the duration of 10 days, chances are pretty high you will have forgotten all of that information by the next time you encounter the word. And if you've tried to learn a language and just look up all the words along the way, you will know this feeling that you see a word you've learned before, you've looked up before, and you can still vaguely remember that you've seen it, but you just can't come up with the meaning. In theory, you could keep going like this, just look up the words whenever you encounter them, and eventually you will remember them, but it's just really inefficient, and it takes a long time, and it also has a few other downsides because it takes you out of your flow while you're reading. So if you're really invested in a story and you constantly have to look up words, you constantly have to stop, pick up the dictionary and look those words up, it takes a lot of time. Up here, the SRS can help a lot. Using SRS is a lot more efficient. What is our goal with the SRS in this case? To get the forgetting interval of a certain piece of information, in this case, the word house, to a level where its durations of the time until you are about to forget this word is longer than the natural frequency of the word. And just to stay with the example I gave you for the frequency of 10 days for the word house, you put it into your spaced repetition system, you start learning it, you repeat it a few times, and eventually through this repetition, the word in your mind has takes about 20 days for you to forget it. But if you remember, the word appears for you every 10 days. So in essence, the information stays longer in your mind. It takes longer for you to forget this information than the interval in which you're seeing this word, which means the SRS has done its job. And now you can just keep this memory alive in your mind just by interacting with the language, just by reading, just by listening. And the funny thing about all of this is this also applies to everything else we know, be it your mother tongue or even your name. If you today, from 1 second to the next, you would stop hearing your own name, you would stop reading it, other people would stop calling you that, eventually you would forget this word. You would forget your own name. But we've heard our own names so many times that the information is really, really strong in our mind, and it takes years to forget this. Same with your mother tongue. If you move to another country and you stopped speaking, it will take a long time for you to really forget your own mother tongue. But eventually it happens. It degrades over time. So with information in another language, it's the same. And our goal with the SRS is just to get to a level where just by continuously interacting with the language, with content we enjoy, that we can keep this information alive and then dive into immersion, where we can tag onto this piece of information new knowledge we need to understand the language. What is important for all of this is that to make this as efficient as possible, because there are some words you forget over and over again, we have to make it as memorable as possible. As I said before, there are other factors that influence this besides just basic calculations, which are really complicated. There are other factors like how your emotional state is in this moment, how many other information you have that is connected to this one piece of information, and so on. So when we are creating our SRS cards, our goal should be to make them as memorable for us as possible. The first point is to create those cards from content we consume. And people who used SRS, even used SRS systems, but created their cards from word lists, for example, even those people, when they switch to creating cards from their content, can attest to this. It makes it much, much easier to remember this information. And I'm going to give you an example in a second. If possible, we also want to add audio, so we can also hear the word, which makes it easier to pick it out later on when we are listening, because reading and listening, they have some overlap. So if you're learning a word in reading, you will sometimes be able to pick it out while listening, but it's not 100%, and it's easier if you can hear it. And also pictures. If possible, add a picture of the scene you found the sentence in, or whatever it may be. And to give you an example, this is a card that I created by now if I had to guess, about 2 years ago. And I took the JLPT, Japanese Language Proficiency Test, about a year after I created this card. So 1 year gap between me creating the card and taking the test. And in the reading portion of the test, the word, which is the go word of this card, which is kisechu, came up in this reading test. And I can still remember I was sitting there reading this text, and I saw the word and thought, hey, that's this word I created the card for. Oh, it's in this, that's where I read it. That was the scene. So even 1 year after I read this specific point, I could still remember the scene where it happened, the book where I read it in, or in this case, the manga I read it in. So this memory was really strong for me, and that happens for a lot of words. Not to this degree, but you can still remember a lot about for a lot of words. You will have this experience that you can remember where you got it from. But not only that, creating it from content you enjoy will also make your repetitions, because you have to do them every day, will make them a lot more enjoyable. Because every time you do a repetition for a card you have created before, and it has a sentence, for example, from a book you read, then you will remember that. From a comic you read, then you will remember the scene. Like, it's that. Oh yeah, right. And sometimes even this can lead to you, at least for me, it did a lot of times, that I wanted to reread a certain book. Oh yeah, remember, I want to read this again. It was interesting. And there are a lot of upsides to this. So this is just an example. So you can see having all this information, this additional context around, makes it easier to remember. That's what I said before. Information in itself is easier to remember if you have a lot of other information connected. And all this context from reading a book and taking the sentence from there is additional information that makes it easier to remember the main part. Okay, so now that we understand why we are using the SRS to make our immersion more comprehensible, to efficiently get a basic understanding of words, so we can have a higher comprehension of the content we are consuming. What are we doing to support people? What is our goal? Migaku was founded by Lucas now about a year ago, and a little while later Yannick joined. Then we have Kirian, we have Julius, we have Bent, and our latest member, Lance. All of those people, they are all programmers, and as I said before, I have no idea about programming. So, and I also haven't added a picture because you can see me, so that's not really necessary. We all together are working on this project, and what exactly are we doing? First, we have a website where you can find our guides. It's not as developed because we focus a lot on the tools I'm going to show you in a second. What we currently support on languages is Japanese, Chinese, Korean, English, French, German, Spanish, and Portuguese. So those languages are all supported by our tools. And obviously, there are still a lot of things we can do to help people who try to learn these languages. Right now, those are also the languages we support. We want to support more languages in the future, be it Russian, be it any other language. I just can't come up with Russian. So we want to increase this, but for now, those are the languages we support, and you can learn with the tools that we provide. And what exactly are those tools? What exactly are we doing? In the beginning, our main goal is to make learning from content you enjoy through immersion as easy as possible. To give you some examples, I showed you a card before, I will show you a card again. One of the first tools that we developed was the Migaku Japanese add-on. This is for ANKI, and what it basically does, I have to show you on screen. Even if you don't know Japanese, I will explain it. In Japanese, the kanji you see right here, they all have readings. And on the front of the card, you don't have this reading, and you also don't have the color. And what we did, the tool we developed makes it so you can add the color and the reading with just one button press. You can even click on each of those words and play audio for them. And I started creating cards before those tools were available, and I can tell you it was a lot of work because I also tried to color those words. And And it takes a lot of time because you have to look up the information beforehand, then you have to color those words. Now, if you don't learn Japanese, you probably don't know what I mean with this coloring, and that's also not important. It's just the tools. With one button press, you can add a lot of information to a card that's important for somebody who's learning this language. This one already helped a lot, but the next one, and up till now, I would like to say bestseller, but it's free, so we don't really sell it. So you can download this program for free. Is the Migaku dictionary, and this was, for me personally at the time, this was still before I joined Migaku when this was developed. This was for me a game changer, because normally when you create a card in language learning, you read your text and there's a word you don't know in a sentence, and you copy the sentence, copy it on the card. You look up the unknown word, look it up in a dictionary, copy the definition to the card. Then you look in the internet on Google or so for an image, copy the image, add it to the card. Maybe even audio for the word you don't know. There are some websites where you can download audio for specific words, add it to the card. It took me about 4 or 5 minutes per card like this. And what this add-on did is it's basically in ANKI, in your SRS, you have a dictionary, and you can just, with one button press, you can look up the word, and then one button press, you add the definition. One button press, you add the audio. One button press, and you add a picture. So it's really, really fast, and it reduced my time. It took me about 1 hour per day to create 20 cards, and it took this time down to about 10 minutes. So I saved a lot of time with this alone. And it went even further. This is also part of the dictionary add-on. This is the card exporter. And what this thing can do for you, it will change in a few weeks, so you won't see this for long. But anyway, at that time, you could just, while you're reading, you mark the sentence, you press a hotkey, and then it automatically adds the word in here. It adds the word you don't know down below. And even better, and that made it really, really fast, you can set it to automatically add definitions and audio for the words you don't know. This means that later on you could just press one button and it automatically creates the card as you see behind that, with picture, with audio, with definitions and anything. So while you're reading, one button press and you can continue. And one button press for the next one and you can continue. No additional work to do, which was really incredible. But that's not the only thing. Our main, or our flagship, so to speak, is the Migaku browser extension. This one is sadly still in beta, in closed beta, but hopefully we can get our public release in beginning of next year if everything goes well. But it's development, so you never know what's happening, what new ideas come. We have that we have to add for whatever reason. But this is our flagship, and it basically ports what I showed you before to your browser. And you can, with this, you can not only create cards from your reading content, but also from your listening content. It also tracks your known words. So it isn't shown right here, but you will see it in a second. Those words that are colored here in the background, the extension knows what you know because you mark words as known. And if they are not known, the extension will then underline for you in red. And then you can, if you've learned the word, then you can mark it, hey, I know this word. And every time you do this, your known word counter goes up by 1. So you know how many, or the extension knows, and with the number, you know how many words you've already learned. But not only that, you have also for audiovisual content like YouTube or Netflix, for example, you also have some other modes you can use to learn the language in the way that you want. For example, skip mode. Skip mode is mostly used by people who are really serious about it, because there are also people who don't enjoy it. But what it basically does is when you're watching a show, a good example would be Dragon Ball. A lot of people know Dragon Ball. If you're watching Dragon Ball Z and like 50% of the episode, the two characters are standing opposite of each other and just look menacing without talking a lot of music, but not a lot of speech. And if you take one of those options for the skip option, the times 2 option, for example, then in times when there's no speech, the video gets sped up by twice the amount or 4 times or whatever you selected, which can be helpful. Then also we have different play modes. We have a default mode that just shows you your subtitles. We have a reading mode, which automatically stops the video before a character begins to speak, so you can read your subtitle line and then continue the video afterwards. Recoil mode is basically the opposite. It first lets the audio play, so you can try to listen and see if you can understand it, and then it automatically stops the video and shows you the subtitles afterwards. So they are hidden before. You can listen, and then you can see whether you understood it correctly or not. And hidden is just hidden. There are a lot more functions, but I try to go into the most important ones first. A little bit more. What else? This is now an example in reading. We also have built-in dictionaries. There are a lot of ways you can look up words with our extension. And this works for every language, so you can import dictionaries into the extension, and you can just hover over a word, press Shift, and it pops up. It gives you the dictionary, and you can read your definition. Obviously, in this case, it's just a Japanese definition, but as long as you have a dictionary, so whether you're learning Spanish and you're an English native speaker, you have your Spanish to English dictionary, or if you want, like in this case, you want to have your monolingual dictionaries, you can have that as well. So you can just import your dictionaries and look up your words everywhere just by hovering over them and pressing one button. Then here you can also see, this is just from a news article, what I told you before, that unknown words will be underlined in red. So if we see what we see here, you have some words underlined in red because the extension knows, hey, this is a word you haven't seen before, or this is a word you haven't learned yet. And obviously some more functions where the frequency I explained before comes into play with the red behind this one word in the middle, here where it's a little bit red, because you can also import frequency lists. You can import frequency lists in the extension, which will then color words according to their frequency. So just with one glance at the word, you can see how frequent is this word. And why is this important? If you're a beginner in the language, it obviously makes more sense to learn words that are rather frequent instead of learning words you will only see every few months. So this can help a learner to decide what words are worth it for you to learn them right now, and what words you rather wait till later once you already have all the basics down. So this is once again where the frequency stuff I explained before comes into play. And we are working on something that will make this more personalized, because as it is right now, frequency lists are created by taking, for example, a huge library of books and creating the list from all those books. But obviously the frequency depends on the content. So if this is content you don't interact with, it doesn't help you to have a frequency for it. So we are working on something, but I'm not going to tell you too much. I will tell you what we are about to do later on for some features. Then our newest addition to all of this is our reader, which is also in the browser. You can import your ebooks and can read them with all the functionalities from before. There's still a lot, since this is a new feature, there will still be there will still be improvements just for this reader. But for now, you can read your books. You can, in languages like Japanese and Chinese, you can change the writing from horizontal to vertical. It automatically tracks your reading time and how many pages you read, how many books you finished, and all of this for you. So this is the last big thing we added as of now. So you can also use all those features I explained before and all the other ones I didn't explain while you are reading your books. So you can easily create cards with one click. So what are our future goals with this project? Obviously, there's a lot we want to do, but I can give you some examples in a second. The major goal of our project is to create a one-step tool for immersion, so that people really, if you try to learn a language, whatever it may be, you can create your cards with one click, you can interact with your content in a way you like, with different learning modes, and make it as easy and as enjoyable as possible for people to learn a language with content. So they don't have to rely too much on learning with books or learning with classes, and they can do it through content they enjoy, because that is what's going to keep people going. There are some people who enjoy learning grammar and getting into the nitty-gritty of all of it, but for a lot of people, that's not what motivates them. So our goal is to make this as easy as possible to interact with content you enjoy and learn from it, create your cards from it, look up your words, whatever you need. And I'll give you a few examples of what's still to come. One of the things we have in planning and that isn't out yet is the catalog. And what is planned for the catalog? What is the idea? Right now, if you're trying to decide what content you're about to watch, you can get a rough idea of how difficult the content is going to be, obviously by just looking at the content. Because obviously, if I'm going to watch a kids show, chances are pretty high that it's going to be a lot easier than if I watch a movie, an adult movie, whatever it may be, if I watch Spider-Man or I don't know. But that's just pretty rough. Especially if you're out of the beginner phase and you're intermediate, it's really hard to decide what content is at a level where I can enjoy it. Because for some content, you might go into it and you understand only 5%. If you take something easier, you will maybe understand 15%, 20%, 30%, wherever you may be in your level. And the idea behind the catalog is, as I explained before, the extension always knows, if you use the extension over a long time, it always knows what words you know. It is basically a collection of your knowledge in the language. And in the catalog, we can use this information that you have, the words you have collected, and can tell you for a specific show, hey, this show, you know about 90% of the words in here. There are only 10 words you don't know, which can tell you, hey, I can watch this show and probably understand a lot. So you can just parse through, see some books. You can look up a certain book you're trying to read, and it can automatically tell you, hey, this is how high your comprehension will probably be when you're trying to read this book, trying to watch this show, trying to play this game, whatever it may be. And that is one of the big features of this extension, that it can track your information, and we can use this to tell you what content is going to be comprehensible for you and what is going to be really, really difficult for you. We can do this for Netflix, we can do this for books. And that is the feature we are trying to develop with the catalog, and that will hopefully come soon. So for all the people that are using our extension, so they can always take content they enjoy and understand a lot. What other things are we planning? Free public release. Like I said, right now we are still in beta, so only our Patreons have access to the extension. But we'll have a public release, like I said, hopefully at the beginning of next year. But you can never be sure. It's software development, so everything can still change. But there will be a public release, and you will be able to use the extension for free. The next thing, obviously, mobile apps. This has to be included in today's time, where you can just, for example, the reader is a good example to understand this. When you're in the reader and you have your books, that you are out and about and you still want to get some immersion because you're sitting in a bus or you have break at work, and you can just synchronize the mobile app with our cloud, and you get all the books you read at home on your tablet, and you can use most functionalities that the extension in the browser also has. So as much as possible, we want to port to mobile. And the last thing we definitely want to do as well is our own SRS. Right now, and for a lot of people, the most popular SRS is probably ANKI, because it's free, it has a good functionality, and thanks to all the add-ons, which we also took part in developing some, make it really customizable. But there are obviously limitations, as we are not the developers of ANKI, and every time ANKI gets an update, our add-ons get broken. So, and I asked the guys, it seems to take a lot of time and work to fix them so they work again. And there are other things we would rather spend our time with. So our main goal is also to develop our own SRS that makes it easier for us, and it's just integrated with all of our tools. So you just have to download once without any of the other add-ons, and it works. And you can select your language and keep going. There are obviously other benefits because ANKI is not perfect. There are a lot of things that could be improved with ANKI. And if we have our own software, we can do that. We can directly change things we want to change to make specific for language learning and what we need and the needs of our users. So those are some things we want to do in the future. Obviously, there is a lot more. We want to go as far as we can, but that is what it looks like right now. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this because I'm already at the end and I'm done for now. And I hope you took something out of this, why we are doing immersion learning, what the goal of the SRS is, and all of this, and what you can do to make this a little bit more efficient if you're learning from content you enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Steven. It was very well explained, and I believe everyone here enjoyed it a lot. Let me add Fabiano and Vinicius. We have a question from Anna. Vinny, can you read? Your mic is off. Oh, okay.
I think it's not listening. Okay, so she would like to know if you have any tip for someone who is beginning to use ANKI.
Any tip? Don't rely too much on the basic settings. You can use it, but it's not optimal. There are a lot of things that can be improved. One example right off the top of my head, besides just optimizing it for you, because it really depends on what your retention rate is. There is a setting that basically when you fail a card, so you forgot a word and you have to fail it during your reviews, there's a setting that tells ANKI, and it's in the basic settings, it resets it to 0, meaning if it had an interval of like 3 months before and you failed the card, it goes back to 0 and you have to start from there again. And this is the setting I would definitely change. You can change it right from the beginning. You have to play a little bit with it. For example, you can up it to 30% or so. That means when you have a 1 month interval, or let's make it easier for the math, you have a 100-day interval and you fail the card, and instead of it going back to 0, it goes back to 30 days or 40 days if you said 40%, which helps a lot. And it also makes sense because you're not learning completely new information. And just by relearning that information, even if you have forgotten it for the moment, strengthened that knowledge in your mind. So I wouldn't let it at 0, change it a little bit, try it out. At least I would go with at least 30 or 40% and see how you go. And the important thing here is don't think too much about it. If you encounter the word later again, and even with those 30%, you still forgot it again, you can still fail it this time. If it's not something really important, it really depends on what you're trying to learn also. If you're learning a language, definitely go with this. If you're studying for medicine or so, where it's important that at a certain point in time you have to know certain information, then it's not the best setting to change. So this depends a little bit. But for language learning, definitely give this a try, set it to 30 or 40%, and you will have a lot less reviews by doing that.
Thank you, Steven. I will talk in Portuguese with them, Steven, a little bit.
No problem.
Pessoal, o curso que a gente está fazendo de extensão, que é a respeito de aprendizagem ativa com o ANKI, a gente tem no segundo módulo, várias aulas explicando sobre alterações de configuração dentro do programa, para vocês entenderem, né, as coisas que são interessantes de serem alteradas e tudo mais. Ok? Então, a dica que o Steven deu era de que algumas configurações padrão do ANKI fossem alteradas com o objetivo de melhorar a eficiência. Ok? Vocês têm mais alguma pergunta, gente? Aproveitar que o Steven está aqui para auxiliar a gente.
Só uma observação antes de qualquer pergunta. As configurações recomendadas do PSA, até se quiserem, tiverem interesse, a gente tem um post também no Instagram falando sobre isso, acho que é de alguns meses atrás, e a gente bota em 70%, né, essas configurações. O Steven estava falando de botar de 30% a 40% para o aprendizado de linguagens, mas também o que é recomendado, que foi recomendado pelo PCA, é de 70%, que também é válido.
Steven, you was talking about interval modifier, right?
Interval modifier is a little bit different. This is just your
reveal new interval, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Something like this, exactly. Interval modifier is how fast your intervals grow. So you can change that they grow faster or slower depending on how good your retention rate is.
Right. We have another question. Vinny or Fabs?
Giovanna asks if there are any tips for the Japanese learning specifically.
For Japanese learning. Okay. That's a really a long topic. A basic tip for Japanese learning. Really, that's really difficult, I have to say, because there's a lot you can talk about.
You can talk as much as you can.
I can talk as much as I want.
As you want, yeah.
Sure. For Japanese learning, as there are a lot of parts, what's important, but it's not just a general Japanese thing, it's an overall language learning thing. As I talked before, there is a difference between you trying to learn for a field like medicine, where you have a test, and you have to have certain knowledge at a certain point in time. With all of this, don't fret too much over every certain piece of information. You don't need them all at the same point in time. So especially if you're using the SRS and you forget certain information, just fail the card and keep going. That is not only important for Japanese, but also for other languages as well, and also for your mental state. Because if you fret too much about it, you will just stress yourself out, which will worsen your memory if you are stressed too much all the time. That's the basic thing first. For Japanese overall, you have those 3 writing systems, which makes it really difficult. And as always, you should start with something like with learning Hiragana and Katakana. You can do this in whichever way you like, but also in this case, don't fret too much about it. Don't try to write them a million times until you are perfect at them. It's more than enough to get to a level where you can, at least that's also where I stopped and a lot of learners stop, or that's also our philosophy, where you should, in this case, stop at a level where you can, for Hiragana and Katakana, you're able to recognize them, even if it takes you a few seconds. Once you start reading, even if it's only reading in a grammar resource of your choice, you will see, especially Hiragana, over and over and over again. And before you realize it, you will be at a level where you can easily read it, just as it would be in your mother tongue. So that's important. Don't take weeks just to learn Hiragana and Katakana. For kanji, there are a lot of ways to go about learning them, and it also depends on what you personally like and what's interesting for you, because there are as many resources as you want. We have Wanikani, we have our system that just went public, so you can get it for free. But our personal view is, our view is at Migaku, it's best to learn it alongside what you're doing. So I also did this in the beginning, because when I started learning Japanese, it was still the mantra that you have to go through RTK, which is basically learn an English meaning for about 2,200 kanji before you start with the language. So you get the kanji for car, and you just, when you see it, you can tell, hey, it's car, but you can't pronounce it. That's basically what RTK roughly is. So you have a rough connection to the kanji in your mind. But this changed a little bit, and right now our idea is, or the tool we developed does, is basically it creates, in a similar way, you still learn the English meaning, but you learn it only shortly before you're about to see the word. So not like in RTK, you learn 2,200 kanji, and about 500 of those you will almost never see. There are still some in there I haven't seen yet, because they are really rare. There is for some trees or so, and trees I don't even know in my native language what they are called. So our tool basically reduces this to only learning the kanji you need. So you get a meaning, you learn the kanji today, this is the kanji for car, and a few days later, a card in your deck that you are learning from appears. Oh, kuruma. Oh, that's the word I learned before. Now you have a connection. You know, just a few days ago you learned the kanji, and now you have a word with it. And just by going a few days before, just by trying to remember that you already have some kind of information about the kanji, which makes it easier to remember the word afterwards. But you're only learning the kanji you need without going too much in detail with strange kanji that go into all kinds of trees and plants and whatever it may be. So that's important, and just going at a slow pace, because there are a lot of kanji you have to learn. If you're doing like the first 1,000 kanji will cover probably most of what you need for the first year. Everything beside that is not that important, and then the rest will come with time. You don't need to focus on learning readings for single kanji, because some kanji have a ton of readings. You have readings that are repeated really, really often, and after a while you develop a feeling for them. So just don't worry too much about this. Learn your kanji and then learn your words, and with that you will develop a feeling for how all of this is connected. And when you then encounter new words with kanjis you are familiar, you will know, or you can give an educated guess as to what the reading may be. And this is just, don't fret too much about it. In other languages as well, like I said, just keep going, learn this information, learn it in words, learn it in content, and then you will be good.
Good. That's cool.
That was my answer.
And I have another questions about the Japanese language, but I will ask you later. We have another. Yeah.
It's better to make your own decks or to use pre-made decks.
There are people here who are not taking our course on ANKI, so they are making questions about very basic stuff. I wonder if you could answer some basic question.
Sure.
Okay, Fabian, please.
Yes, the next question, if it's better to make your own deck of cards or if it's better to use pre-made decks for your cities.
Depends on where you are in your journey. And obviously this is also a point that I frequently mention. In the end, even with something like ANKI, it has to be enjoyable for you, because you have to be able to continue doing it. So for some people, they don't have the time, or they don't find it enjoyable to create their own cards, and it reduces their motivation to do it. So if that is you and you don't like creating your own cards because it takes you too much time, even though, like I said, with today's tools, it's not that big of a deal, but some people still don't like it, then use pre-made decks. It's better than nothing, so don't worry too much about it. Obviously, like I said, it could be better, and that is basically when you're doing your own decks. But even if you're creating your own decks, pre-made decks still have a place, especially in the beginning. Because in the beginning, when you know basically 0 words, it's not really feasible to try to get your content, or when you're creating sentence cards, for example, to get them from content you try to interact with. So it's easier in this case to just start out with a beginner deck that gives you the first 1,000 or 2,000 words. And then once you have a basis, then you can dive into content and create your own, which makes it more memorable and all the stuff I explained before. So you can definitely also go completely with only pre-made decks. It's probably not as good in the long term, but it's definitely a viable option. And in the beginning, it's definitely a good idea, because it's really hard to create cards from content you understand nothing about.
Yeah. We have another question. Thank you, Steven.
No problem.
I think this subject is very important for the people who is beginning using the program.
Start is the hardest part.
Yes. We have another question from Victoria. Please, Fabiano. Your mic is off.
Oh, yeah. Victoria is asking if there are some settings that you can make flashcards to answer in a team or together with other people. If there's any add-ons, that's possible.
Not that I've heard of, because it's information for you, so it wouldn't make too much sense to try to answer it with other people. But the only thing that kind of comes to my mind, at least when it comes to learning Japanese, there is Kotobabot, I think it's called. It's basically a game where it shows you words and you have to type the answer, and you can do this with other people as well. And it's kind of like a game with other people who can answer more words correctly when it comes to reading. It's not about meaning, it's about reading, because in Japanese, being able to read the words is a big part of all of it. So this is a kind of game you can do. But in ANKI or in other SRS systems, I know not really.
Explicando melhor, Victoria, para você esse assunto, quando a gente utiliza o ANKI, a gente tem que pensar na curva do esquecimento. E a curva do esquecimento, para os assuntos que você estuda, ela é individual para você. E ela é individual também para cada ideia que você tem na tua cabeça. Então, se você estuda uma palavra em uma outra língua, você vai esquecer, diferente das outras pessoas ao seu redor, numa taxa diferente. E é por isso que a gente recomenda que o ANKI seja usado de uma maneira individual, não em equipe, sabe? Porque cada um vai ter um tempo individual para ver de novo aquela carta. Beleza?
Eu vou até complementar a fala do Luiz, é que nem a gente explica no curso, o ANKI, ele achata a sua curva do esquecimento, só que a curva do esquecimento, ela não é a mesma para todo mundo. Então, como ela é individual, o algoritmo também tem que calcular individualmente qual será o tempo óptimo de revisão para você.
Sim. Fabiano, se quiser explicar ali para o Steven o que a gente estava falando, para ele não ficar perdido.
We were just talking about the forgetting curve in ANKI. That's individual, so the algorithm has to calculate when the revision is best for you, so it wouldn't be suited for answering in team or...
Yeah, exactly that also. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Giovanna talked about your your answer about her question, and I have a question using her response. Okay, her answer. On your journey, did you get to use Wanikani at some time?
I tried it in the beginning. But I had a lot of problems with the colors, and which I didn't like, and typing the answers is not my thing. And for me personally, there are people, obviously, the good thing with Wanikani is you have a structured system. You can just start. You don't have to think about it. You can just keep going. So if you're a really busy person and you just need something where you can log in, you do your reps, and you're done for the day, then Wanikani is probably the right choice. But I personally like to customize what I'm doing and like to optimize it for what I'm currently doing. So with Wanikani, you're pretty set in what you're doing. And it has some other small problems, like that it shows you information at parts too often. You can suspend cards if you already know them. For example, you saw it in your content the content you were engaging with, and you already learned the information, so you don't need to review it, but you can suspend it. Or you saw a word that was really important for a certain story, and you want to learn the kanji, but you can't because it comes up in level, I don't know, 50 or whatever, but you're only at level 20. So there are some downsides, but if you are really busy and you just need something you can log in and start doing, then Wanikani obviously is an option.
Yeah. I've been using Wanikani since January. Yeah. I'll be taking N2 this year. Thank you. But yeah, I think if you are a busy person, using Wanikani is comes in handy, right?
Yeah.
Because you just need to start. You don't even need to study the platform. You just go there and press start, and
Yeah, exactly.
you begin your journey.
Through all those kanji.
Yeah. Talking about immersion, as you were preparing for JLPT N1, did you get to study grammar itself? Or
Oh, grammar study, that's always an interesting topic. I think I have to go a little bit back to explain this. So my grammar study mostly was also through the SRS, and I started with Thai Kims. Like I said, a lot of tools weren't developed when I started. Seems like
Thai Kims is a good.
Yeah, exactly. Source. And I just read through Thai Kims and created sentence cards from his example sentences with the sentence on the front, with the grammar point. I marked it in red, and on the back side I added his translation and the explanation of the grammar point. I finished this for Thai Kims, and that was basically for structured grammar. That was it for me. From then onwards, I just, whenever I encountered a grammar point while I was reading, I would look it up, just enter it into Google and see what comes up, and create a card from the sentence with the grammar point explained on the backside. Once it got closer to the JLPT, to the N1, I bought a book, the Kanzen Master Bumpo book, exactly, and I went through it. I also, for those who don't know, the structure of the book is basically you get a collection of some grammar points. They are explained shortly with some detailed information, and then you get a lot of questions that you have to answer, and afterwards you can check whether you're correct or not. And I went through this and also created some cards for new grammar points, but a lot of it was already relatively easy at that point in time. So mainly my grammar study, or that's my philosophy for grammar study, I don't want to go too much into details, how it's built, what the different words are, because like I said, I'm really bad at grammar. I know what a noun is, what an adjective is, and that's basically the extent of my knowledge when it comes to grammar. And when I look up grammar points, I just want to know this grammar points means roughly this, and the rest I personally don't care about, how it's built and so on, because that is something you will get just from seeing it over and over again. And now that I'm more advanced and I can look back at those grammar points, a lot of it now feels natural. A good example I could give where you notice this is nanoni. Or was it nanoni? I'm not 100%. It should be nanoni. And in the beginning, I liked Great Teacher Onizuka. And in one of the, I think it was episode 7 or so.
That's good.
of the live action version. Live action though. I watched the anime,
my God.
but this time it was the live action, the 2012, I think, version. And in the 7th episode or so, there was a point where I'm not exactly sure what she was saying or so, but the word, but she used nanoni. And I still remember I couldn't understand. I wasn't sure what does this sentence mean. It seems like it's cut off in the middle. And I learned this grammar point, and now it's one of the, after seeing it over and over again, because I only looked it up once at that point in time, and now it's one of the easiest grammar points for me. It already feels like what it's trying to express, this kind of that something is igai, something that shouldn't be. So I'm bad at explaining grammar, but this is one of those points where I realize, hey, this is the easiest way to go about it. I don't have to fret too much. I hate grammar study, so just give me my content and I'll be done with it.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much, Steven, for coming here. You are very thoughtful coming to speak to us. Thank you very much.
No problem, was fun. I liked it. Although I was a bit nervous, but expected.
That's such a great talk.
Yeah. We can finish then? Fabiano, quer falar alguma coisa? Pro Steven?
Não. Acho que...
Ok. Vamos finalizar então, pessoal. Eu espero que vocês tenham tirado um bom proveito dessa palestra. O Steven foi muito solícito, muito gente fina, né, falando aqui, de ter aceitado, vindo falar com a gente dentro do PSA. Qualquer dúvida que vocês tiverem, podem encaminhar para a gente no Instagram também, a gente vai respondendo. Para quem está fazendo o curso do PSA sobre o ANKI, também, eu espero que vocês tenham aproveitado bastante. Eu procurei encaixar essa live bem na segunda semana, porque é na segunda semana que a gente está comentando sobre o ANKI, a usar plugins, a alterar as configurações do programa. Então, eu espero que essa live sobre imersão tenha ampliado os horizontes de vocês em relação ao uso de repetição espaçada com recordação ativa. Beleza? Então, muito obrigado por virem. Vejo vocês na próxima. Tchau!
Tchau, até mais.
Tchau, tchau.
Tchau, tchau.